What is up, boyos, and welcome to Last Week in Games, where everything is video games. My name is Jake, and today I am joined by nobody. Last week, we had one real big piece of news that I want to talk about. Also today, it was announced that we will be getting a State of Play on Wednesday. I will be releasing this video on Tuesday, so the State of Play is tomorrow, and I figure let's talk predictions and such. So we're gonna start with the State of Play predictions. Over on Twitter, we got a tweet from PlayStation stating, "Tune in on YouTube, Twitch, or TikTok this Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 p.m. GMT for 40 minutes." Covering 15 plus games, including extended looks at Stellar Blade and Rise of the Ronin, plus more from talented game developers from around the world. So I'm sure you guys are all aware that last week we did get it like a little Xbox showcase, and it was pretty decent. We got to see 5 games. I believe it was 5 games. They all seemed pretty awesome. We got the announcement of the Indiana Jones game, and at the end of the episode last week, I said, but what does PlayStation have in store, right? Because we don't know what PlayStation is releasing besides like Helldivers, which is more of like a second party game, and then also Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which again, really it's a console exclusive, but it's not a Sony game per se. So what does Sony have in store for 2024? That's the question. We all want to know what's going on with Sony. To me, it seems like Sony really leaned hard into the games as service thing, and that left them in a bit of a vulnerable position when they realized it wasn't as easy as they thought it was. You know, we were supposed to get the Last of Us factions. We were supposed to get, Fair Games or whatever. They announced a bunch of these live service games that we still have yet to see anything about. Maybe we'll see a couple of them at this game, but we already know that Factions was canceled. And it was stated that both Guerrilla and Sucker Punch were working on live service type games as well. So did this push the production of a lot of those games that we would have expected to see by now? And now Sony's in a bit of a sticky situation, because one of the things they said here is look out for Stellar Blade and Rise of the Ronin, which both look like great games. Like, don't get me wrong, they look like great games, but they aren't exactly like the first party like big banger games that we normally see from Sony on any given year. You know, like last year we got Spider-Man, the year before that we got God of War. This year we don't have anything like that. Now at this State of Play, it is totally possible that we could see like a Ghost of Tsushima from Sucker Punch, which would be really cool. I'm going to be honest, I don't really expect that. I kind of expect Death Stranding 2. I could definitely see that showing up here. But honestly, I think these like 15 plus other games are going to be a lot of third-party games. I think it'd be a huge hit if Sony were somehow able to get Hollow Knight Silksong at this thing and a release date for that. That would be like a huge get for Sony if they were able to pull that off here. But once again, that's not like a huge first-party game from Sony. So I'm going to be honest, 40 minutes, that's a long time. That's a lot of time to show off a lot of cool stuff, but I'm honestly not expecting a whole lot from this State of Play. Like I said, I do think Stellar Blade and Rise of the Ronin look like great games. I'm expecting to see Death Stranding 2 here, maybe a trailer, maybe a release date. I do expect to see a little bit of Helldivers at this thing, considering it's releasing like next month, I think. So that seems pretty predictable. I think we'll probably see a little bit more of Final Fantasy because that comes out next month as well. So that seems likely as well. I think the big hit, if we were to see something here, it would be from Sucker Punch. If Sucker Punch has a game in the chamber, we know Insomniac doesn't have anything ready yet, just because of the leaks that came out a couple months ago. So I wouldn't expect to see them here. If we did, that would be incredibly surprising. I think it's incredibly unlikely that we see something from Naughty Dog, although possible. If we were to see something from Naughty Dog, it would just be like a really short teaser trailer for something that's coming out in like 2 years. Maybe just like a logo treatment for The Last of Us Part 3, if that is what their next game is. I have no idea. So I wouldn't expect that either. Another thing I'm thinking is maybe something from Sony Bend, because the last game we saw from them was Days Gone, I believe, and it could be possible that we see a Days Gone 2, which could be possible. I could definitely see that. Another weird thing that we could maybe see at this thing is maybe a trailer for that Last of Us documentary that's coming out. That's supposedly coming out February 2nd. So we definitely could see The Last of Us Grounded 2. And if you didn't see Grounded 1, which is the documentary of the making of The Last of Us Part 1, it's so good and it's really well made and it's such an interesting documentary. And I'm actually very excited for The Last of Us Grounded 2, which is about the making of The Last of Us Part 2. So if they show like a little trailer for that, that'd be cool. But honestly, I don't think we need a trailer for that, considering I think it comes out like this weekend. So not totally necessary. So ultimately, when it comes to like first party developers, I'm not expecting anything massive. Maybe we could see Marathon from Bungie here. That's totally possible as well. Maybe a new expansion for Destiny. I'm not quite sure what's going on with Destiny. I don't know if Destiny's done or what's going on with Destiny. So maybe another expansion for Destiny, but it seems as though Bungie's focus has shifted onto Marathon. So maybe unlikely, unless it's like, hey, this is our last big expansion, Destiny. So that's another possibility at this state of play as well. But I'm definitely just trying to keep my expectations grounded and leveled, because to be honest, there's no writing on the wall saying, hey, this is going to be a huge one, this is going to be a big one. In fact, it's the opposite. All we've heard from Sony lately is like, hey, we jumped into live service and everything is falling apart. And it seems like they're like desperately trying to course correct right now ever since Jim Ryan left. So this may give us like a little bit of a summary of what's coming the rest of the year. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be like a magnificent year for Sony. The only thing I could see Sony doing at this state of play and for the rest of the year that might kick up a little buzz is if they were to announce a PlayStation 5 Pro, which is totally possible. I could totally see it happening. I think it's really unnecessary at this point because there's like barely any exclusives on the PS5 as it is. I feel like we're just barely getting away from PS4, PS5, sort of cross-platform games. So to release a PS5 Pro at this point seems a little weird, especially if you don't have like a big game to sell alongside of it. So maybe we could see Ghost of Tsushima 2 released this year alongside the PS5 Pro. But again, that seems more like a next year sort of situation, especially if the Switch 2 is coming out. I think Sony would be smart to just sort of get out of its way this holiday season, and then next year sort of capitalize on being the stronger of the consoles, So I mean, this state of play, I'm very interested in it. I'm very interested what Sony has to say. And I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't think Sony has a lot to say at this time. We'll see. I'm excited to see what games they have to show, but Sony's, to me, has really dropped the ball this generation. Granted, there's been a couple great games that have come out. I think Ratchet & Clank was great. I thought Returnal was great. I thought Spider-Man 2 was great. I think The Last of Us Part 2, the remaster, I think is really good if you haven't played The Last of Us Part 2 before. Horizon Forbidden West was pretty good. God of War, of course. I think I already mentioned that. So, like, those games, huge, great. But usually expect more. I feel like at this point in PS4's life cycle, we had already gotten things like Bloodborne and stuff like that. So I just feel like we're missing those big hits. And if we were to get a Ghost of Tsushima this year, I think that would definitely fill that hunger. Like, that would be enough if they have something like that. I think a Days Gone 2 could also maybe fill that hunger if it's taking the concept of the first game and really upping it. They'd really have to impress the fan base with that, though, because I feel like Days Gone 1 wasn't that successful. The only thing I can think is if secretly Sony Bend has been working on an Uncharted game, which was kind of rumored for a while. Of course, Sony Bend made the Vita Uncharted game, so everyone was like, well, why not if Naughty Dog's not going to make Uncharted games, why not give it to Sony Bend? totally possible. And if they announce that at this state of play, that would be a big hit for them as well, I think. So the other thing I'm thinking is maybe a new IP that we don't know about from like an up and coming studio. That'd be really cool. Another thing would maybe be maybe a new game from Housemarque, the creators of Returnal. It's been a few years. They could have been working on something. So that's another total possibility. So, I mean, I'm just sort of spitballing here. I'm not expecting any of that. I'm really just expecting to see Stellar Blade, Rise of the Ronin, and maybe Death Stranding 2, and then like a bunch of third-party games, which, will be fine. It'll be good enough. But at some point, Sony does have to come out and really impress, because I think their last few like state of plays, PlayStation showcases haven't really hit. They've had a few like huge games like Spider-Man and stuff, but they used to be a studio where like they would have multiple hits in a year, and that just hasn't been the case for Sony since the PS5 came out. And a lot of that can be attributed to COVID and games being delayed like that. But at this point in the game, I don't think we can blame COVID anymore. I think it has more to do with like mismanagement of studios, and like I've said before, pushing into that live service ecosystem. I think that really hurt them. But they could totally prove me wrong at this state of play, and I hope they do. I hope they come out and they're like, hey man, we're getting a new Uncharted game this year. We're getting a new Ghost of Tsushima this year. Blah, 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 blah. I just don't think that's the case, though. I just don't. So moving on to Microsoft. You may have heard that last week there were thousands of layoffs over at Microsoft. In fact, there were lots of layoffs all across the tech industry. Microsoft cut nearly 2,000 people from their teams. And in the tech world overall, there were about 25,000 tech workers that were laid off. Now, I've got an article here from NPR that I'd like to read that goes into great detail about what's going on in the tech world and why this keeps happening. And then I'll sort of put my 2 cents on it at the end. But here we go. This comes from Bobby Allen over at NPR.org. Nearly 25,000 tech workers were laid off in the first weeks of 2024. Last year was, by all accounts, a bloodbath for the tech industry, with more than 260,000 jobs vanishing. The worst 12 months for Silicon Valley since the dot-com crash of the early 2000s. Executives justified the mass layoffs by citing a pandemic hiring binge, high inflation, and weak consumer demand. Now, in 2024, tech company workforces have largely returned to pre-pandemic levels. Inflation is half of what it was this time last year, and consumer confidence is rebounding. Yet, in the first 4 weeks of this year, nearly 100 tech companies, including Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, TikTok, and Salesforce, have collectively let it go about 25,000 employees, according to layoffs.fyi, which tracks the technology sector. All the major tech companies conducting another wave of layoffs this year are sitting atop mountains of cash and are wildly profitable. So the job shedding is far from a matter of necessity or survival. Then what is driving it? Quote, there is a herding effect in tech, said Josh Schulman, a professor at the University of Washington's Foster School of Business who follows the tech industry. Quote, the layoffs seem to be helping their stock prices, so these companies see no reason to stop. End quote. Some smaller tech startups are running out of cash and facing fundraising struggles with the era of easy money now over, which has prompted workforce reductions. But experts say for most large and publicly traded tech firms, the layoff trend this month is aimed at citing investors. Schulman adds, quote, they're getting away with it because everybody is doing it. And they're getting away with it because now it's the new normal. Workers are more comfortable with it. Stock investors are appreciating it. And so I think we'll see it continue for some time, end quote. Interest rates sitting around 5.5% have risen substantially from the near zero rates of the pandemic, and some tech companies are reshuffling staff to prioritize new investments in generative AI. But experts say those factors do not sufficiently explain this month's layoff frenzy. Whatever is fueling the workforce downsizing in tech, Wall Street has taken notice. The S&P 500 has notched multiple all-time highs this month, led by the so-called Magnificent Seven technology stocks. Alphabet, Meta, and Microsoft all set new records, with Microsoft's worth now exceeding $3 trillion. And as Wall Street rallies on news of laid-off tech employees, more and more tech companies axe workers. You're seeing that these tech companies are almost being rewarded by Wall Street for their cost discipline, and that might encourage those companies and other companies in tech to cut costs and lay off staff, said Roger Lee, who runs the industry tracker layoffs.fyi. Stanford business professor Jeffrey Pfeffer has called the phenomenon of companies in one industry mimicking each other's employee terminations copycat layoffs. As he explained it, quote, tech industry layoffs are basically an instance of social contagion in which companies imitate what others are doing, end quote. Layoffs, in other words, are contagious. Pfeffer, who is an expert on organizational behavior, says that when one major tech company downsizes staff, the board of a competing company may start to question why their executives are not doing the same. If it appears as if an entire sector is experiencing a downward shift, Pfeffer argues, it takes the focus off any singular individual company, which provides cover for layoffs that are undertaken to make up for bad decisions that led to investments or strategies not paying off. Quote, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecies in some sense, said Schulman of the University of Washington. Quote, they panicked and did the big layoffs last year, and the market reacted favorably. And now they continue to cut to weather a storm that hasn't fully come yet. So pretty interesting article here from NPR. I really appreciate that. Thanks to Bobby Allen for the insight. I just don't understand why we're okay with just cutting 25,000 jobs in one day or week or whatever just to fulfill some investors in the company. And to lay off the workers who actually do all of the work, who design the video games, who design the websites, who do all of the work, who run your social media campaigns, like laying off all of these people, well, the people who hired them, all of the big executives are just reaping all of the benefits. And the investors see this and they're like, yes, fire more, kill them all. Like that is what we're seeing in the industry. And it's not just this industry either. Like we're seeing it across almost every industry. And it's exactly what they're stating here. Hire a bunch of people to make you a bunch of money and then fire them to just take all of those benefits. This is the problem with Wall Street. This is the problem with investors. This is just more proof that the workers should be the ones who own the company. You know what I mean? They should at least have a say in what's going on in the company, because this is ridiculous. This is what happens when that's not the case. And is this what we like to see? The people who make our games, the things that we enjoy so much, are the ones who get laid off, who are let go. And these big executives get billion-dollar bonuses for doing such things. Well, the creators of the games and the products that we love are either getting let go or they're leaving the company because all of the people that they like to work with left. So they're going and starting their own companies, a lot of them. Which you may say, hey, that's cool, they're starting new companies, but what happens to those companies? They get gobbled up by Microsoft the next week. Like, there's just no winning in this system. Everything is getting gobbled up by something else that's bigger, and then they're getting laid off. And we're just left with these big executives who don't know what the fuck they're doing, making terrible games, terrible products, and making the products that were already good bad. Like, I'm at the point right now where I almost don't want to even talk about video games anymore because they're all fucking bullshit, man. Like, every fucking game that you play is some live service bullshit that I don't even want to touch because the game is nonsensical. There's no story or reason to why you're playing a game. And back in the day when there was a game that's like, hey, this is just sort of like you shoot each other or whatever, part of the reason you would play it is to unlock customizations and skins and different guns and stuff. And now all of that is just you pay for it. So now it's like, why am I even playing? What's the point other than like getting a dub, which is fun, but like a lot of these games don't even feel like super fun because it's like they invented the business model first and then threw some gameplay in there afterwards to sort of make it like playable or whatever. But like that almost never works. Every game fucking sucks. And of course, because we're all fucking gamers, we're like moths to a flame and we keep going to this bullshit. It's terrible. Like, this is not why we want to play games. And you could call me like, oh, you're just like an old ass millennial. Sure, maybe I am. But here's the thing. When you look at like single player games, they haven't been like as affected by this whole live service sort of deal. And those games are still great because there's still a lot of creative people making those games. And that used to exist in the multiplayer field as well. And a lot of those single player games are made by like smaller developers because they're passionate about it, or it's like a one-off thing done by, you know, Microsoft or Sony. But we see now even Sony, who was kind of like the protector of making great single player games, is like, no, we want to make live service too. Like, everyone just wants to make all this fucking money, which great. That's what this is all about. It's all about making money. But at a certain point, you need customers to make the money, not investors. So like the investors will give you all this money to do this thing, but as soon as they see that like, hey, the market has shifted, the gamers don't want to play this bullshit anymore, then what was the point? But the unfortunate reality of it is that gamers will continue to play this bullshit, and I'll tell you why. It's because it's gambling. Gambling is addictive. And that's the way they design the games. They design them to be addictive. And not because they're fun, but because gambling is addictive. Now, I know they got rid of loot boxes because it's not gambling, but let's be honest, like you go into like a Call of Duty game now, it's like you open it up and it just feels like I'm in a casino, dude. All these shiny bright lights like, hey, click this and you'll get this skin. Hey, click this and you'll get this skin. It's like when you're on the streets of Hollywood Boulevard and like all the like dressed up characters are like, hey, take a picture with me. Then you take a picture with them and they're like, $25 right now. And it's like Elmo like screaming at you like, hey, I need my $25 because you took a picture with me. When back in the day, you know, you could just play the game and you could get the Elmo skin just for playing the game. Like that was part of playing the game. I'm really rambling here. I'm really venting because this shit is getting ridiculous. And I just hate that everyone who actually cares about video games and making great games is getting fired constantly. And all these big executives who don't give a shit about you, don't give a shit about the franchises you love. They only care about investors. They're the ones getting bonuses. Phil Spencer, don't let him fool you. Phil Spencer is doing the same shit as all of these motherfuckers. Phil Spencer laid off 2,000 people like just last week. Explain that to me. Microsoft is the biggest company in the world. How the fuck are they laying off 2,000 employees? It's getting ridiculous, dog. Like, this shit is so bad and so baffling and so stupid. How do we fix it? And I think the way to fix it is to just stop playing these fucking games, dude. Stop playing these shitty games like Fortnite. And I don't even blame Fortnite necessarily. I think Fortnite was like the first one to do it, and like that's great. But then everyone else copied that model. So it's not Fortnite's fault. I think Fortnite made a game and it just so happened to be that model kind of worked with it. But now everyone's taking that model and building a game around that model instead of taking a game and being like, how do we make this game profitable? Every game is the same. Every game has the same stupid season pass bullshit. The progression is all the same. There's no innovation. It's boring, man. It's boring. Video games are just so boring now. Don't get me wrong, it's not all games. Obviously, we got things like Baldur's Gate last year, which was great. But once again, that's like a single player game with like co-op capabilities. And anytime there seems to be like something cool coming down the path, like Last of Us Factions, it gets canceled because they're like, oh, it's not profitable enough and we can't use the same business model that we wanted to before. So I mean, like that's just where we are in the state of games, and it's really upsetting. It's really depressing, and I guarantee throughout the rest of this year we're gonna see more and more of it. That's just the way it is. That's just gaming. So let's just move on and let's talk about what's coming next week in games. So next week we've got Death Stranding Director's Cut is coming to Mac and iOS on January 30th. Blaze Blue Entropy Effect is coming to PC on January 31st. Song of Nunu, a League of Legends story, is coming to PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, and Xbox One on January 31st. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink is coming to PS5, PS4, and PC on February 1st. One Punch Man World is coming to PC, iOS, and Android February 1st. Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash is coming to everything on February 2nd. Persona 3 Reload, which I'm pretty excited about, is coming to everything except for the Switch on February 2nd. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is coming to PS5, Xbox Series, and PC on February 2nd. And Vampire the Masquerade Justice is coming to PC on February 2nd. Well, I really appreciate you guys hanging out. We'll be back next week to talk about what happened at the PlayStation State of Play, so tune in next week to talk about it. Hopefully I won't go on some like massive rant again, but maybe I will if I feel like it. Fucking I dare you. I love you guys. I'll see you next week.